Thanks very much. Good afternoon to everybody. I want to talk a little bit today about how one can apply AI and actually an old term, big data, to address some financial crimes issues, some financial crimes problems. I should say I'm from IASD, where a company comes out of Stanford, and the technology I'm talking about was developed there over a period of years under DARPA and National Science Foundation support. So now financial crimes data presents some very well, actually, they're distinct here, but in fact, they're generic, I would argue, about all data that's really useful now that we're finding very useful. So first thing is that we're actually collecting a lot more features on data points. So, yes, we have the transactions, but, you also have people's personal records, and one might even gather free text about them and so forth. So the data, when I say high dimensional, that's a mathematical sounding term. It just means, if you think of a spreadsheet, it means it's a very wide spreadsheet. There's lots of columns in the spreadsheet. Of course, also we deal with the fact that there are now many rows, maybe many more rows, many more people, many more objects in your data set as well. So it's a very large problem. It's multi-structured often in the sense that, well, we don't just want to keep track of numbers in a spreadsheet, but it might have free text, it might have audio, it might have images and so forth. So it could be structured in many different complex ways. Also, I think, particularly in risk and also in crimes, it's important to understand not only what are the strong signals, the things that are kind of obvious, but you want to find the weak signals, the things that right now might not be driving things so much, but that over time may become your strong signals, and you want to know that in advance. You want to be able to see them. You want to be able to deal with, oftentimes your data is unlabeled. You don't actually know that someone is doing something fraudulent. The only thing that you can do in that case is to hope to detect anomalous behaviors. And then finally, time series data. The understanding that if you can understand someone's behavior over time, that's obviously much more informative than any individual snapshot in time. So the challenge here is that, you doubtless know that the title data scientist is one of the most highly sought for or searched for on LinkedIn. They're we're training many more of them, but there's a problem, which is that no matter how many we train, the amount of analysis we're doing is growing faster because it has kind of an exponential character to it. And the problem is that we're dealing with this particular workflow here, where we have a very smart person on the left, a data scientist, an analyst of some kind, who thinks about hypotheses, who attempts to formulate hypotheses. And over time, he or she finds that, yes, I believe this hypothesis, let's go test it. You go test it, and then you find, yeah, maybe it worked, more likely it didn't. And you have to go back and try another hypothesis. It's kind of if you like, the old-fashioned scientific method. And it worked really well back in the 1600s when Newton was formulating the laws of physics because he had small amounts of data to look at. But nowadays, they simply aren't subject to, the data isn't subject to the kind of simple explanations that one had then. So this is a big challenge, and it's reflected here in the fact that the number of hypotheses, the number of columns in your spreadsheet, if you like, or a number of sets of columns, is growing way, way too rapidly. And so we can't really address this with people. Okay. But so you need to do some kind of artificial intelligence then. You need to incorporate artificial intelligence into what you do. So the question might be then, the question is, what kind of properties does such an artificial intelligence system have to have? So the first thing is that you don't want to have to come in with a hypothesis. You need to be able to discover in an unsupervised and an unbiased way what's in your data. You need to have some way of interacting and understanding and representing your data that gives you information about it without your having to ask, I'm looking for this or I'm looking for that. Okay. You need to be able to predict. That's a big part of the goal here, is to attempt to predict the future from what you've learned about your data. The middle one here was the most surprising thing for me as we started to enter this space, and in general thinking about the data, how important it is that the methods that you use, that the algorithms you use, have to provide explanations, human readable explanations for the conclusions that you draw, certainly, but even more, you need to provide accessibility into the algorithms, because anything automatic eventually breaks down. You want to be able to understand why it broke down and how can you fix it. So all this stuff heading under transparency, and in particular human interaction with the data, providing lots of human interaction and human readable outputs is really critical, and it will be in the use case that I'm going to talk to you about in a minute here. So you also need to be able to act or to propose actions. After all, the whole goal here is to do something good, do something useful, and so if you're not going to produce any actions out of it, then that's problematic. For us, we found that our company, originally, we thought that we would simply be able to study data, find insights, and people would find that useful. But in fact, what people need is end-to-end solutions. They need applications at the end of it. They don't need to have insights, or they don't need to have insights alone. They need to have applications that implement what it is you'd want to do based on those insights. So those are the actions. And then critically, also you need to be able to learn, because the data changes over time. The landscape of your data changes over time, certainly. But not only that, as you build your application and you implement that application, people over time will start to try to game it. Or in any case, their behavior with that application is something that you also want to be able to learn on, so as to improve the performance and improve what it is that you get out of the application. So this is, kind of a powerful set of things that we're asking for here, and in fact, we provide these things, and it's actually a critical part of the anti-money laundering application that I'm going to talk to you about. Okay, so now, what is it that one needs to do here? What are the sort of the competing problems that come up when you're dealing with financial crimes situations, such as money laundering? Well, the first thing that you want to do is you want to make sure that you're building an application, you're building tools that allow the bank to feel secure that it's actually doing its duties, it's doing what it's supposed to be doing in terms of detecting the crimes. They want to be able to go to a regulator and say, look, we're doing the right thing. They want to also believe in their own minds that, in fact, yes, we really are doing the best that we can at trying to prevent these crimes. Now, on the other side, though, and the bank that we first worked with, HSBC, on this, had an enormous number of people working on the anti-money laundering alone. Okay, a large number of thousands of people working on it, and they were in a situation where they were going to actually have to add on to that group of people to make it even that much larger, so as to be convincing to regulators and to themselves that they were doing the job that they should. But that, over time, is going to become a very expensive, very, perhaps even unsustainable thing that they might, or unsustainable procedure, so to speak. So what we're trying to do then is to say, look, there's the trade-off between, are you actually doing a good job on the one hand, and are you being efficient about it? Are you doing things so that you don't, use people's valuable time and skills unnecessarily? Okay. So here now is kind of a picture of where our algorithms, our analytic component fits. So we don't have sort of an end-to-end complete solution. We fit in with people, other companies who do many other things. So, for example, there's the know your customer data that comes in on one side, and a lot of other data generation, data collection parts to the process, which sits there on the left. In the middle is our data analytic layer. We call it intelligent segmentation. So the actual goal here is to say, I want to take the set of all transactions that are going on, and I want to somehow identify them in terms of segments and pieces, and recognize that in some of those segments, you're basically never going to have money laundering, you're not going to have much criminality, and in others, there will be a higher concentration of criminality, so that we can start to kind of triage and figure out, well, which cases do we actually have to deal with, and which ones don't we have to deal with. And of course, there's then to the right, there's the kind of reporting layer. Once you actually have something that's alerted as a suspicious activity, that you go out and you investigate it, you produce reports on it, and the reports will tell you whether or not you you decided to go further to prosecute. Okay, so so there's a lot of aggregation that goes on in the data here. It's based on transaction types, direction, and value. Geographic location is actually quite important, and also risk-based ratings that come out in various forms. Okay. Okay, so the intelligence segmentation then at HSBC, let me tell you that story. We actually first interacted with the bank a couple of years ago. And of course, as a data artificial intelligence firm, we're looking for the right, most valuable use cases. We were originally pointed in one direction, which was just sort of a customer analysis problem. But we were told, yes, that's a, let's see, that's a 7-figure problem, or perhaps 8-figure problem. But they said, for us, money laundering is a 9 or 10-figure problem. Okay. And so, we chose to go after that one. Part of the reason it was is they had an alerting mechanism that produced alerts to their investigators. But it had a 98% false positive rate. And I have to say, when I heard that, it kind of blew my mind away. But I realize now that actually in many situations here on the FinServ side, when you're doing this kind of alerting things, those kind of false positive rates are not so unusual. The bank suggested to us that, look, if you can improve that, if you can knock 3% off of that false positive rate, we'll consider that a success. Okay. So we went in and we used our methodology, which is called topological data analysis. It's a particularly flexible and useful way of analyzing very complex data, of which these transactions certainly are that. And produced segments for them. And what it turned out was that they had been viewing their data with also some segmentation, but very, very crude and coarse. And by putting in appropriate weighting schemes now and saying, look, if you're coming from this segment, you don't need to worry about it. We will not file an alert on you. On the other hand, if you're in this segment, let's look more carefully. By doing that, we were able to actually reduce the false positive rate, not by 3%, but by 26% initially. And now, as it's gone into production, around the world, essentially, that number has gone up considerably. So we've allowed them not to grow the team of investigators. And so I think that's been a huge win for them and for us. So the intelligence segmentation delivered this. The methodology delivered this. We are now building applications that can be sold more broadly. So HSBC is obviously a very large bank. They had some unique problems, but there are also some features to this that really go across the spectrum. And so it's been quite interesting, and we're working and looking forward to understanding more and more of these, financial crimes kind of issues, just ordinary fraud, perhaps the initial know your customer, all that kind of thing. So I think I'll stop there and take a couple of questions.
The 98% false positives, my guess is the bank is frightened of the regulators, so they check everything. So on the flip side, if you miss one bad customer, they're in trouble.
Yeah.
Have you done any work on the other area, catching bad guys that they haven't caught?
So in fact, the two things. So the first one was that one of the conditions was we had to produce a methodology that was transparent and that was systematic, and that furthermore, on the retrospective data, didn't miss a single one that they actually had alerts on. So that was part of the preconditions. Now, that sounds like it might involve overfitting, but in fact, it doesn't. It's just a precondition there. And so indeed, we said at least retrospectively, we wouldn't have missed anything you missed. Now, what we also found, though, because the segmentation is intelligent like this, then that, in fact, we also found a lot of new false negatives for them. We found things that they had missed.
Well, that's terrific.
Yeah.
Any other questions? No. Oh, I see.
I'd be curious to hear you talk a little bit more about the justification element, and then you mentioned this one, the HSBC, they require transparency.
I'm sorry, the justification piece?
Yeah, is there ever, then I would assume there's a trade-off between like how good you could get it for them with less transparency versus more transparency and maybe not as effective?
Well, we usually don't find that the transparency is a trade-off between that and other things. I think it's just a net plus. We have a good understanding of what these segments are, and so what it allows us to do is to say that when we do say something is worth looking at, we say it's worth looking at for reason A, B, and C. These are the following criteria that are satisfied that that our software used to identify this person as risky.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Any other questions before we let Gunnar go? Excellent.
All right, thank
Big
you.
round of applause.
Thank you.
I lost him.